have you ever pondered the pivotal role that AI plays in transforming customer engagement and also driving personalisation to new heights? Well, in today's episode, we're going to dive into the intriguing intersection of AI technology and customer interaction strategies. And I've got a great guest joining me today. Her name is Sam Richardson. She's a seasoned customer engagement consultant at Twilio. And Sam brings more than 2 decades of expertise in enhancing customer engagement for some of the world's leading brands. And with a deep dive into the recent research revealing that only a third of UK organisations are prioritising customer engagement in their AI strategies, I want to uncover the barriers, opportunities and transformative potential that AI holds in redefining how businesses can connect with their customers. I also want to explore Twilio's recent findings that highlight a crucial gap in aligning AI initiatives with customer-centric outcomes. And yes, there is a fair amount of scepticism and financial pressures out there that are increasingly being cited as significant barriers to AI adoption. So I want to find out how organisations can move beyond those challenges to harness AI's full potential. But I've revealed far too many spoilers already, haven't I? So I'm really looking forward to getting Sam on the podcast today. But before we get today's guest on, it's time for a quick shout out to the sponsors of Tech Talks Daily. And in today's digital age where data breaches are all too common, securing sensitive information has never been more critical, right? Well, enter Kiteworks, a pinnacle of managed file transfer security, or MFT security. So with its FedRAMP moderate authorization, a prestigious certification that they've held since 2017 by the Department of Defense, Kiteworks stand as a bastion of security in a sea of uncertainty. This isn't just about meeting standards, though. It's about exceeding them, ensuring your data's safety within your organisation while streamlining compliance processes that ultimately save you time, effort and money. So step into the future of secure file transfer with Kiteworks by visiting kiteworks.com today to see why it's hailed as the most secure MFT on the market. So once again, kiteworks.com. And now, let's get today's guest on. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Newcastle, where Sam is waiting to join us today. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Sam. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Neil. So my name's Sam Richardson and I'm Director of Exec Engagement over at Twilio. Before I come on to what Twilio is and who they are, I've had probably too many decades to count working in technology transformation for customer experience. So I've seen all sorts of different changes in those 2+ decades that I'm sure we'll touch on. Over at Twilio, as I say, I lead our exec engagement programs across EMEA and APJ. And what that means really is that I do a lot in terms of thought leadership and engaging with senior people in our most important customer organisations to help them think about predominantly what next. So it's a great role and I thoroughly enjoy it, especially working for a company like Twilio, who really defined the category for CPaaS. And now we bring together kind of the best-in-class communications with best-in-class data through our CDP and are really bringing those two entities together to drive the future of customer engagement, very data-driven customer engagement. Kind of that's what we believe the future will be, with an AI layer over the top of that. And I'm sure that's not the only time we'll say those 2 letters today.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you did say them. I mean, it's great to have you on the podcast today, and Twilio will be a household name. There's so many people listening, and I love the word you used there as well. You said you help people or help organisations discover what's next. And for most business leaders, AI is not only what's here, but it's also what's next and what will be next for the foreseeable future. But I think since it exploded, just 18 months ago, the world seemed to go nuts almost overnight on Gen AI. A lot of businesses have sat on the sidelines wondering what they're going to do next. Some say, we don't want nothing to do with this. Well, outright ban it. We don't want our company data being on there. Then the APIs came out. And you must have observed so much skepticism, financial pressures, and indeed infrastructural limitations as major barriers to AI adoption. So I've got to ask, from your perspective, What are the most effective strategies organisations can employ to overcome these challenges and maybe start fully harnessing the potential of AI for customer engagement? Because I don't think they can just bury their heads in the sand and hopefully it goes away and it's just another fad. It's here to stay, isn't it?
It is here to stay. And I think that would have been like denying that the internet was ever going to be a thing. You know, it's, for me, it's that equivalence in terms of transformation and change. I think that with organisations, you're right, skepticism is a really interesting word, because I still think an enormous amount of people still are skeptic. They're thinking, is this the metaverse? Because remember when we were talking about the metaverse a lot, which is not, and also park the metaverse because I think it will come back. But I think organisations really have to start inside first and really start with that education, literacy. I mean, even in our own family, right? I look at me, who is, I would definitely say I'm an AI optimist. Look at my sister, who is terrified of it. And that's just in one tiny little microcosm of our family. So I think that organisations really have to start with that AI literacy. They should be prioritising it to employees, helping them understand how it can help their everyday work. Even in terms of rolling it out, you know, think about your employees first, especially those that are customer facing. Think about those first. Think about how it can help them build up that trust and transparency and that literacy as you go. I think that once you start to do that, once people are more involved with it, then you can start to be really clear on what the value is. Not necessarily the ROI, because again, I think we get tripped up with that quite a bit in technology. And this especially, I think we have to think about being really clear on what the value is to employees as well as to customers. And I think you mentioned infrastructure as well. And I think that infrastructure is a huge blocker. So once you've taken care of that kind of education piece, then really need to get a look at that infrastructure. It's interesting at Twilio because we tend to meet, you know, we have all 300,000 plus customers from all shapes and sizes, from one-man, two-man startups right the way through to enormous global organizations. The thing that they tend to have in common is that they're really diligent and thorough about the tech stack and modernizing the tech stack. Those organizations we meet who tend to be slow to adoption, a lot of it is because their tech infrastructure is legacy, it's heavy, it's out of date. They kind of have a rip and replace mentality. They're kind of stuck by it. So I think the next place is really to have a look at that tech infrastructure. And then third, it's got to be the data, because that data architecture is going to be absolutely critical. And you could be the most optimistic organization in the world, but I think unless you've got your data, really, unless you're on top of really making it clean, architecting it well, then you're probably going to hit some limitations in terms of what you can achieve with any AI initiative that you've got. And that will only then compound that skepticism with your employees that you heard before. Again, I've been lucky enough, or unlucky in some cases, to be involved in an awful lot of tech rollouts, and where I've seen it really not land and really not be adopted and fulfill its potential is when the employees have lost faith in what it is and just think it's, well, we've seen this before, we've been here before, it hasn't worked. So it's really this cycle of infrastructure, data, company culture and education. And I think that loop needs to keep going round and round and round to really make the most of what could be game-changing technology.
Yeah, completely agree with you. And I suspect much of the skepticism is as well from business leaders that have been burnt in the past when they focused on technology first rather than the problem, and using tech for tech's sake and running into things like garbage in, garbage out. And I suspect with nearly half of IT decision makers now focusing on technology before considering things like how does it actually serve customer outcomes and how companies can ensure their AI strategy aligns more closely with the real needs of their preferences of their customers. These are steps that have been traditionally almost neglected. But this is what I've seen in my former IT career. Is this what you're seeing too?
Yeah, as it ever was.
Yeah, it's same as it ever was.
Some things just never change. Yeah, I think, like you say, nearly half of IT teams tend to start with the technology first and get very excited at that, and then look for ways to implement it, and then kind of thinking about CRMs and things, shoehorn all of the processes and the customer journeys around what the technology would be. And let's face it, the reason why we see a crisis today, and I am going to call it a crisis, which is a word that's been bandied around a lot in the last 4 years, I know.
Yeah.
In customer experience and customer service today is, I personally think, because a lot of technology was introduced, patched together, it's siloed, it doesn't talk to each other because of exactly that. They started with the tech rather than what the customer needs really were. Easier said than done, right? Because that work to understand what the customer outcomes are that you want, I think only about just over a third of organizations actually do that. It takes a lot of work to understand your customers. It's not just the data. It takes a real skill to understand who they are, communicate with them, understand what outcomes you want to generate, and then be able to work backwards from there. Much easier in a greenfield site as well, I think, which is why we see brands like Octopus Energy doing really well. You know, they were able to build their platform with the customer outcome in mind, which gives them an advantage immediately over, you know, something that happens the other way around. So I think that, you know, it's difficult. I think, again, it comes back to being cultural, because some of it depends on how cohesive an organization is, what the CTO's role is. If it's just technology, you know, we might see that technology-led deployment rather than customer-led deployment. I think at Twilio we have a slightly skewed view, because by virtue of our customers, they tend to be builders. And I've met some absolutely brilliant CTOs who really act as these dot connectors across the whole organization. So they're responsible for kind of unifying an organization and being able to understand what outcomes and be able to get to that. What outcomes do we want to achieve? Okay, what technology do we need to implement? But again, I think that's not, as we've seen, that's only about 50% of organizations. So I think that role of the CTO actually is really important, Neil.
Yeah.
And it's evolved. Those people who just changed their job title from IT to CTO, it's not quite it. And I haven't defined it yet. You know, I'm sure you've got probably more wisdom than me on this. But there is something really interesting about this new role of the CTO and the roles, responsibilities that come with it that I think is quite different from what it would have been even 5 years ago. And that's pivotal in terms of, I think, how successful organizations will be in aligning AI with customer needs.
Yeah, there's so many great examples out there. And I love how you mentioned Octopus Energy there. We had Greg Jackson on about 3 or 4 years ago. He was so far ahead of his time on a lot of this stuff. They've enjoyed so much success as a result, haven't they?
Yeah, they are growing rapidly. They are, you know, I'm lucky enough that I'm in lots of rooms with great professionals. And it's always interesting for me the way, whenever you mention the name Octopus, people's faces, and pardon the pun, light up.
Yeah.
Because they, even at the height of, you know, the enormous energy bills, Octopus was still really seen as being on the side of the customer and a champion of the customer. And I don't think it's too much of a stretch of imagination to understand that actually it's because the technology is developed around the customer and the customer needs, and that helps us feel like they're on our side and working with us, as opposed to, you know, dead ends for chatbots and self-service and being forced to go online when you don't necessarily want to go online. You know, I think that I don't think that the role of technology should be underplayed in this sense, because I think it's key to why Octopus have such a place in our hearts and minds, especially in the UK.
Yeah, completely agree. And you mentioned there, as from a consumer point of view, when a lot of companies force you online, force you to talk to AI chatbots, that we've seen a lot of bad examples that you just want to swear at it continuously till it lets you in to speak to a human being. And given the chatbots and hyper-personalised interactions are seen as significant benefits of AI by both IT teams and consumers when they're done right, I'm curious, how do you envision these tools evolving to further enhance customer engagement? And are you able to provide any positive examples of where these technologies have actually transformed that customer experience that we're talking about?
So I think personally, what we've seen before is just those very rudimentary early stages of chatbots. You know, they were just FAQs, let's face it. And you end up going down cul-de-sacs. And in retrospect, I don't think we should be too harsh, and we should just appreciate that this was early stages of chatbots and what they can do. I think what we see now with more and more natural language chatbots, especially those whereby we're seeing it really plugged into large language models, the generative chatbots that we're seeing emerge, they're going to get really good, both from a voice basis. And we work with great partners like Poly AI, who've got fantastic voice chatbots, you know, really doing some impactful things, as well as then the more written, the traditional chatbots. And I'm going to come back to Octopus again, because they've done it really well. They worked really hard to apply AI across their email responses, and not necessarily a chatbot per se, but I think it gives us a good indication of where we can go with this. They saved so much effort and time from their employees by training a bot to be able to handle email queries that they actually saw customer experience stats go up, because ultimately what we want as customers is a resolution, and this was able to get the right resolution quickly. So I think that that's a really good example. I think that IKEA have good examples of chatbots, and what I particularly like about IKEA is that they're using it almost in the way that it should be used, because they are reskilling people that would have dealt with mundane queries in order to be able to handle more of those sort of complex queries. So I think that there are some really good examples out there. I think in the next 12 months, it's going to get better and better and better, both from a voice prospect as well as perspective, as well as a traditional kind of chat perspective, purely because it's getting easier to implement. Now it's just very much an AI-based implementation. The large language models with Gen AI, when you apply those, and you've got great natural language in there, they're getting better and better and better. You probably know it from your own everyday interactions with OpenAI or PyAI or whatever it is that you decide to use. They're getting better and better and better. And I think that we will see a massive maturity in terms of this market. And I think as long as customers get the resolution they want, more customers will use it as well. I don't think it's fair to say that we hate dealing with robots or bots. I just think that, again, they've not been very good at solving our queries before. And ultimately, as customers, that's what we want. So personally think I think we're going to see them finally fulfill their potential.
Yeah, and I think so much of that gold that they're able to unlock now is because of all this vast amount of data that is collected on a daily basis. Previously, that was all just hidden away somewhere. Nobody knows what to do with it. It was hidden all over the place, and so many insights hidden in there. But just for any business leader that's not aware, can you elaborate on how AI can be leveraged to not just collect that data, but intelligently use that data to create more meaningful and personalized customer interactions? Because that's where the magic happens, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just, and again, I think we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves in the past, because this was just very early days of us understanding how to harness and make use of these vast and, completely incomprehensible volumes of data that we've now got and organizations have now got. It is no mean feat to make that clean, readable and actionable. So it's no wonder we've struggled with that. However, I think now what we're seeing is, with the maturity of customer data platforms and things like this, that ability to be able to surface relevant data about you, Neil, and be able to use that to then build up a profile, understand who you are, make some not guesses, but a little bit more educated than that, be able to be a lot more predictive about not just the group that we've assigned you to, but you as Neil. What probably are your preferences? When do you like to be contacted? And really start to apply some intelligence to that communication that we power. This then starts a flywheel, because the better the communication, the more likely you are to give more data and more first party or zero party data the better that then builds up your profile, the more then you're able to kind of power this flywheel so that your engagement gets better and better and better, and we can collect more information about you that becomes relevant. I think the trick here is not to make that obviously we don't want to make that creepy or intrusive in any way. So I think it's about keeping we're going to have to be pretty good at keeping good design principles here and saying, actually, these are the boundaries we don't want to push. We always want it to just be relationship building. We don't want it to be intrusive. We don't want it to be too personal. It's just got to be something that is relevant and serves the customer well. And I think that that's always worth bearing in mind. I think the other way that AI really helps with that, so there's that very personal one-to-one level. I think it also is going to be, it's transformative for marketers, because all that effort that would go in before in terms of building up audiences, building up predictive models, doing all of that hard work in order to target groups of individuals with particular campaigns. What we're seeing with our segment CDP is a lot of that back work is that's just being taken away because AI is absolutely capable of not only doing that for you in a fraction of the time, but also, again, it's that power of the generative learning, right? Keep learning what works, and being able to process, it's almost like make every bite count rather than big groups and swathes. So I think it's really exciting. I think it will be transformative because, again, we'll finally be able to understand what we mean when we say personalization. I think that there are hundreds of different interpretations of what it is. And some people do it really well. Some people treat it as a recommendation engine. But I think that AI will help us be able to build up more of those personal relationships, which I think, again, is where we see personalization falling down, because it's still a huge, I think something like 80% upwards of customers say that this is what will make a huge difference to the relationship they have with their brand. And yet we know that only around 50% of organizations do this to any kind of credibility or any kind of effectiveness. So there's a delta there too. So hopefully we'll see that delta kind of narrow.
And I think as well for business leaders, there's a certain amount of confusion and complexity that they have to navigate around, especially with the research out there at the moment indicating a clear split between operational efficiency and organisational growth driving AI adoption. So I've got to ask, for any business leader listening, how should they balance these objectives while also developing their AI strategies? Is that a way to ensure that both goals are met without compromising on customer engagement? Because, again, quite a tricky balance.
It is a tricky balance, and I don't think it's one that many organisations have got right now. And I think when you're looking at customer engagement and customer service, there's no doubt that there's a lot of pressure on at the moment. We know that standards are declining, so that standards are declining because the complexity of nature of queries, attrition rates in contact centres, customers. I don't know if we are becoming more demanding or we're just frustrated because so much of the burden for self-service has fallen to us, but it's really hard to do. So I think that at the moment, there is a real pressure to be investing in AI for operational efficiency. I think it's a way that business leaders are looking, CTOs, CEOs, CFOs are looking to say, this is how we're going to take some cost out of the business. I think it will be a very disciplined organisation that is able to say, hang on a second, before we do that, let's really think about what we want to achieve here and think about what experience we want our customers to be able to have. I think for some organisations, that's probably a luxury position at the moment, but ultimately we know that that's at the heart of a good strategy, right? Understanding what it is you want to achieve. We talked about it earlier. What outcomes are you aiming for? And then how can we do this and how can we utilise AI to both create that efficiency? And I suppose the other flip is if organisations can just use it to take out some of the hard work through, voice bots or chat bots or, fantastic even IVR experiences or something like that, then at least it frees up some capacity for human agents to be able to perform more of that customer engagement role and be able to better service customers. So I don't think that there's a straightforward answer. I think it always has to be this dance between the two. You know, if we take some cost out, hopefully that'll free up more agents. And then we can keep taking cost out and we can keep freeing up more agents. So it feels like it should be a dance. My worry is that we'll go too far in the operational efficiency given the pressures that are on organisations today.
And of course, if we go back just 18 months, I think Gen AI blindsided most business leaders. So it makes it almost impossible to predict the future, especially with the pace of technological change at the moment. But if we do look ahead and have a little gaze into a virtual crystal ball, are there any emerging trends or advancements in AI that you anticipate or excite you that maybe will have this significant impact on how brands engage with their customers? Are there any innovations on the horizons that businesses should be preparing for now as well? What excites you about that road ahead?
What excites me is probably thinking about it in a slightly different way, which is flipping the question around and saying, how are us as customers going to engage with brands? Because let's say we have more and more control of our data and we can decide what to do with it. Tech becomes more interoperable because at the moment it's still quite siloed. And I think in the UK, we've seen the benefits of like open banking and things like that. And I think it would be really interesting to say, right, if we keep expanding that notion and we get more control of our data, I don't know what the future will look like, but I can't help but wonder, you know, if we're in control of the customer journeys ourselves, even if we've got our own bots, can you imagine? Bot-to-bot servicing is rumoured to be on the horizon. Then I think it's really interesting because I think it asks fundamentally different questions for organisations about their understanding as to what a customer journey is. And I think that for me is where it starts to get really interesting because, again, a lot of technology has been applied to make existing processes slightly better. I think what I'm looking for and excited about is when that starts to flip on its head and we can completely reimagine customer journeys. We don't know what that's going to look like, but I think that's probably a fundamental shift that's on the horizon. It sounds a bit woolly, because I don't know exactly what that will look like. But my hunch is we as consumers, the trick is to take some of this self-service burden away from us. Right? And I think that for me is something that's on the horizon.
Exciting times ahead, and it isn't going anywhere. So for that 20% of organisations or people from those 20% of organisations that might be listening that are still sat on the sidelines of AI implementation, any advice that you'd offer to give them that would help them begin their journey towards integrating AI into their customer engagement strategies, and any tips on how they can ensure that approach is both customer-centric and poised for competitive advantage too? I appreciate it's a huge question, which is a podcast episode on its own. But is there any advice you could give?
I think, first of all, don't be afraid. We've been here before with the internet. You know, we're able to adjust, and actually, great leaps forward in humanity always come with technology leaps forward. So you know, you've got to get stuck in and get involved in some kind of level. But I think the first is understanding what kind of level that is for your organisation. I think there are three things that are really important for an organisation to get in place. And that is, and we talked about them earlier, right? So it's your tech infrastructure, it's your data architecture, and it's your culture. Mm. And I think that those three things are really important. In terms of culture, that's employee and customer, well balanced. I think lots of organisations claim to be customer-centric organisation. They're not, as we know. But that's also because it's easier to say than it is to do. So I think for me, if I was to pick one of those things, your data is probably the number one priority before rolling out AI, to make sure you're getting good stuff out and good, you know, your inputs and outputs are equally as good as each other, because we know so far, especially with large language models, that rubbish in makes rubbish out. So I think that if any organisation is going to start looking at how they can use AI, I think that data is a really, really core way to start at it and ask that question: is our data in a good enough shape to start doing this? And then kind of work from that. Once you've done that analysis, then start to think, okay, now what's going on in our organisation and where can we test and learn this in a really small way? You know, these don't have to be big things. It can be very small. You can just apply it to one reason for contact, or one small process, or one, you know, just one product line. You don't have to be big with this. You can start small, keep iterating it. I think the strength of that test and learn will be who you've got involved as well. Again, silos aren't going to work here, because you need all parts of the business involved in order to really understand, is this working? Will we have the outcome that we desire? Have we got all the parts we need? And pulling all of those different parts of expertise together. So I think, you know, very much data first, then start some experiments, start some small experiments, see what happens, test it. And then, you know, don't just do it for the sake of doing it, but make sure you're really clear and considered about what it is that you want to achieve with it. It's not easy to get started, right? But we're all in it. We're all learning together. So I would say probably the other thing is lean on people who might be slightly ahead of you. You know, I think collaboration is really the name of the game now. We have to start collaborating with each other and learning from each other.
And I think that's a powerful moment to end our conversation today. So a huge thank you for sharing your time and your insights, not only with myself, but everyone listening around the world today. And as a fellow East Midlander, as a thank you, I'll see if I could offer you, a chip cob or a pea mix, but I think we can dream bigger than that. So some of the biggest names in business, VC, funding and tech have either been guests or listened to this podcast. So if I was to ask you, is there a person you'd love to have a private breakfast or lunch with? Who would it be and why? Because he or she might just be listening to this, and let's see what we can manifest together. But who would it be?
Well, I might go slightly left field with this. Now, in the tech world, I would love to have a sit down with Azim Azhar, because I think he's brilliant. However, if you were really forcing me to have a breakfast or lunch, and maybe breakfast running into lunch with somebody, I think I would pick a historian. So I'd probably pick somebody like, he's not in the business or VC world, but I'd pick somebody like Peter Frankopan. And I'll tell you why. Because we are in the moment of it's not unprecedented change, actually. We need our historians to kind of remind us of all of the great leaps forward that humans have made before, so we can put it into context and understand what's happening. So I think I'd quite like to have some meals with Mr. Frankopan, because I think just talking about that history of the world, the evolution, the Silk Roads, the Industrial Revolution, really helps us put today into context, and probably makes it a bit easier to navigate what's ahead, and kind of have a bit of faith that it probably will be all right in the end.
What a great answer. And I think it's such an important one, because there is so much fear and anxiety about the world of tech and where we're heading at the moment. But as you've said a few times, we've been here before, from the arrival of the internet more recently, and the arrival of smartphones and app stores and digital disruption. We've been here. I did a Google search recently. I think it was 20 jobs that didn't exist 20 years ago. And it's all things that we take for granted now. Things like cloud engineers, social media managers, podcasters. There's so much. Yeah.
Well, my first job, I was managing the fax machine and the telex machine.
Wow.
So, there we go.
Incredible. Well, for anyone listening that would like to find out more information about you, Twilio, the work that you're doing there, where would you like to point everyone listening?
The Twilio blog is a great place to go, because we have got all sorts of wonderful resources on there, not just for developers, because we're a very we love our developers at Twilio, but it's not just for developers. There's also some great tips on customer engagement and best practice and what you should be thinking about next. So the Twilio blog is a great place to be. And then obviously the socials, LinkedIn, I think, we're on X and Twitter, whatever we want to call it these days. So you can find us in all the usual social places.
Well, we covered so much in a short amount of time today. And the one thing I was going to discuss, we didn't have time. There was a great quote from you. I think it's a moment to finish on. And it was about AI. And I think you said, when AI is used to its full potential, it allows brands to know every customer like they are the only customer they have. And I think it's a beautiful moment to end on. So thank you for sharing that and your incredible insights today. Really appreciated you spending time with me today, Sam.
Thank you for having me, Neil.
So a huge thank you to Sam Richardson. Fantastic conversation. So many golden insights there from today's guests. And I think it's clear that AI is not just a technological advancement. It's almost a catalyst for building deeper, more personal connections with customers. And that journey towards integrating AI into customer engagement strategies is filled with challenges, but also it's abundant with opportunities for innovation and personalization. And as we all collectively look to the future, how will you and your organization leverage AI to enhance customer relationships? How will you drive engagement? I invite you to join the conversation, share your thoughts on how AI is reshaping the landscape of customer engagement in your industry. And it's nice and easy to do. I'm the easiest guy in the world to find. techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, just @NeilC.Hughes. Don't just hit connect or follow, though. I'm not the follow me, I follow you guy. I'm the guy that wants to meaningfully connect and talk to people that listen to this podcast every day. People like you. So please, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast for more insightful discussions on the intersection of technology and real-world solutions. So if you enjoyed it today, come back tomorrow. We'll do it all again with a different guest. But thank you for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.